Good evening, folks. Welcome back to our second edition of Cowboy Wisdom. I hope that it helps you focus in a little bit more about what life in the rural parts of the United States are like. And the story I'm going to tell first tonight is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. But it was early June, and we were sitting at the table eating lunch, and there was a knock on the door, and my mom said, "Well, I wonder who that could be. I didn't even hear the dogs bark." So my dad got up and went to the door, and there was a man and his wife and two small children. And my mom's Spanish is pretty good, and the man said that he had heard in town that my dad often used hired hands, which was true. We often did. And my dad told my mom, he says, "Well, we really don't have anything for them, but go ahead and hire them. Tell them they're hired." So my mom invited them in, and we made room for them at the table, and got fed and taken care of. And we had a small little single wide trailer that we used for hired hands. And so we took them out there and showed them where the trailer was, and we turned on the propane and hooked up the electricity and all that kind of stuff. Well, it turned out to be one of the best decisions my dad ever made, because he was just a wonderful man and had a wonderful family. And he was a hard worker. Whatever my dad needed him to do, and most of the time he would see things that needed to be done. And you'd go out in the morning and he'd already be started on something that he saw that needed to be repaired, tied up, or whatever. And he was just a great guy. And many times in the evening, my mom used to kind of get mad at us because his wife was an excellent cook, and we'd sneak over there and have supper with her. Yeah, because she's a really good cook. So my mom and dad helped them get their American citizenship. It was a lot easier back then than it is today. But they went through the process and got them their citizenship. And it wasn't long until he found a better paying job with more benefits and health insurance, those kind of things that, of course, we couldn't offer out on the ranch. And of course, my dad was thrilled. He always said, I don't want anybody working for me who don't want to better themselves." But they became very dear friends. And my mom and dad and him, they visited off and on over the years. And 30 years later, when we lost my dad, him and his wife were sitting there in the audience, and he was just openly crying and weeping. He never forgot the kindness that my dad showed to him and his family. And he was as brokenhearted as any family member when we lost my dad. And I tell you that story because, we could use a little more kindness today, a little more outstretched hands that help somebody up the trail. We focus so much on ourselves and what we want to do and what we have going, that we forget that there's lots of folks out there could sure use a helping hand. And when you do give them a helping hand, you might be surprised. Just turn out to be as wonderful as that man and his family turned out to be. They were just wonderful folks. But they weren't the only one. That was a couple of folks that worked for us over the years that my dad helped in various ways. And we never expected anything in return. My dad helped because he wanted to. And he felt like that was something he should be doing. And it never failed. His kindness was always repaid. And I learned all through my growing up years that extending a hand to someone who needs it is just what you do. That's what you do as a caring human being on this planet. You just extend the hand. Now, my mom never would give money, especially if she smelled alcohol on them, but nobody was ever turned away from my mom's door without food in their belly. She'd feed anybody, didn't matter what their circumstances were. She'd give them a hot meal and help them feel a little bit more human, I suppose. But every day as we went about the work that needed to be done, we were repaid for every time that my mom and dad extended a helping hand. That they were repaid. And so like I said, I learned this lesson very young. And after I graduated, I went to work for the Torrance County Sheriff's Department. I worked there for 26 years. And one night, this couple, they were from Georgia. That old car they were driving was, I don't know how they got from Georgia to New Mexico, but anyway, he blew out a tire, and there was a business there in Moriarty that threw old tires in the back of the shop. And so he hopped the fence and got a tire and was trying to mount it when the owner of that particular business showed up and had them arrested because they couldn't pay for the used tire. $10. They didn't have $10 to pay for a tire. And anyway, they brought him to jail, of course. And the young lady, boy, she helped the cook and swept and mopped and helped clean up. She was just a wonderful lady. And he fixed anything that needed fixed and what have you. And they were trying to get to California. His uncle ran a painting business and told him if he could get out to California, he would have work. So they stayed there in jail about, 5 or 6 days, I guess. And the sheriff, he come in one day and he said, I just talked to the magistrate judge and their bond is set at $10, the value of the tire. So we passed the hat and gathered up $10. I know you're not supposed to, but we did. And we gathered up more than $10, but we sent $10 up to the magistrate court so they could get turned loose. And we took the rest of the money and filled their car up with gas and bought them some food and fruit and ice chests, that kind of thing, and sent them on their way. And once again, kindness never goes unpaid. It was a couple of years later, the sheriff got the most heartwarming letter thanking us for all that we had done to help them get on their feet, and they were working regular, and things were going good for them. And it was just a beautiful letter, and just kind of bring tears to your eyes. But the sheriff I worked for, that's the way he believed. He said, he always told us, look, the job is not to fill up the jail. The job is to keep the peace. And it turned out, a couple of years later, a gentleman come through much in the same kind of circumstances. And he hadn't done anything to commit a crime other than vagrancy. And anyways, he come by the sheriff's office there, and of course we passed the hat and filled his old truck up with gas and bought him some food and stuff to get him on his way, because he was going to Texas for a job. So about a year later, my cousin was the shop manager at this particular automobile dealership, and he was telling him the story, and he said there was a guy there named Ronald Riley. Do you know a Ronald Riley? And my cousin said, I guess so. He's my first cousin. So it wasn't too long after that, I got a brand new cap from the dealership in the mail with just a heartbreaking letter on how grateful he was that we helped him get down there and get a job, and he was getting established and, getting regular paychecks. And all he could send back was that cap, but it was worth $1 million to me. And that's just the way I was raised, and how we learned to do things. My parents were never bigoted in any shape or fashion. If you worked and earned a living, you were okay in my dad's book. That's all he really required of someone, was that they worked and supported themselves or supported their family, whatever the case may be. And he was always ready to give folks a second chance. He was real good like that. And there was a time or two we got skiing. Somebody really took advantage of us. But both times it was family. It never was a stranger. But life just goes a lot smoother and a lot better if we're willing to stick out a helping hand. Growing up on the ranch, my grandpa, he was a rancher. All he knew was cows and horses, and that's all he wanted to know. And my dad was the same way. So him and my grandpa, they got along great, more like father and son. And but anyway, he had a bad cancer come under his eye, and back then they used cobalt radiation, and he had a real bad reaction, and they had to take out a big part of his head where his left eye was, and you could stick your fist in the hole. And twice a day my grandma would stuff it with cotton balls and put a patch over it. He milked and checked his cows and went on tying up his fence and whatever he needed to do. We were just taught to play the cards that we got dealt, but that didn't mean we didn't help out. And my grandpa and grandma were just like my mom and dad. If you showed up to their door and needed a hand, you were going to get it. You were going to get fed. And if my grandpa had $1 in his wallet, well, all of a sudden you had $1. That's just the kind of folks I grew up around. And we always tried to live our lives by those ethics. It's kind of an unspoken rules that we live by. And